See, part of what I teach when I teach the history of the Constitution is I show you that there's nothing new in our Constitution, our Declaration, or our Bill of Rights. Everything inherited, nothing invented. 700 years, 5 documents. And yet we still have people that can be brainwashed into believing that we invented it all and therefore we can reinterpret it all in a new modern living way. Our Constitution is not a document like a statute book that tells you can only drive 75 on the interstate. Our Constitution is a document of time-tested, blood-bought principles. Go look up that word principle in the dictionary and you'll see it's a term that describes something that cannot be changed or compromised. It is true throughout history, so it is true throughout here. Now there's an important word here, reserved, that tells us a lot about what we need to know in keeping the proper perspective in government. And so let's look at this by way of illustration. We have a chair here. Let's just pretend this chair has a sign on it. Reserved for KrisAnne Hall. This chair says reserved for KrisAnne Hall. If someone else sits in the chair, what do I have the authority to do?
Oust them.
Right. I have the authority to kick them out. Everybody's still awake out there, right? You guys are just busy swatting. I know, I see that. Now, the chair says reserved for KrisAnne Hall. If someone else sits in this chair and I don't have the authority to oust them, is the chair really reserved to me?
No.
No, because that word reserved, which you will see again in the 10th Amendment, is a very powerful word. And it implies that the reserved nature of this chair means that I have exclusive dominion over it. I have the authority to secure it to me and protect it from anybody else. And I want you to look at these powers again that are what? Reserved to the states. Lives, liberties, properties of the people, the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. Reserved. That means if anybody tries to exercise those powers, the states have an inherent authority to oust them. Now, the 9th Amendment is, by the way, the most important clause in the entire Constitution and Bill of Rights. It is the 9th Amendment, another one. The 9th Amendment that makes us a republic and not a kingdom. It is the 9th Amendment that declares that all the rights in the universe belong to the people, whether they're written down or not. The 10th Amendment is the next most important clause in the entire Constitution and Bill of Rights, because the 10th Amendment declares that power, not rights, are delegated, and that any power not specifically, remember, limited and defined, specifically delegated to the federal government is what? Reserved to the states. Or to the people. Because we are the original possessors of the power. We created the states on July 2nd, 1776, with the ratification of the Lee Resolution. We did not create the states on July 4th with the Declaration of Independence. That's the day we published and declared what we did. On July 2nd, the Continental Congress met, debated, voted, and ratified into law the Lee Resolution, a 3-step process to declaring independence from Great Britain. And on July 2nd, our independence from Great Britain became a legally binding act, just as legally binding as anything our Congress does today that's constitutional. Now I want to ask you a question as we keep this proper perspective about government. Have you ever read the Bill of Rights? All right? Have you ever read the Bill of Rights and noticed that 9 and 10 look different than the first 8? The first 8 list individual rights. 9 and 10 do not, because they serve a different purpose. Another reason why these are the 2 most important clauses in the entire Constitution, because remember the Constitution is what kind of document?
Compact.
Compact, which is a contract, right? Every well-written contract has a clause or a set of clauses called rules of construction. These rules of construction within the contract tell you how you are to interpret every other aspect of the contract, and that's what these are. The 9th and 10th Amendments are the rules of construction to our constitutional contract. And they declare, no matter what clause, article, clause, section you are interpreting, you must remember rule number 1. All the rights in the universe belong to the people. You must then remember rule number 2. Once you've established that all the rights belong to the people, you must remember rule number 2, that only power is delegated to government, and its limited and defined form means that if it's not specifically enumerated within the text, it is not a power that is delegated to the federal government, but a power that's reserved to the states.
Amen.
And always to the people. Why? Because of another very important word in the 10th Amendment that we see. Powers what? Delegated. Is the word delegate synonymous with surrender?
No.
Well, now you know more than Justice Scalia on the Supreme Court. Because he has gotten that wrong. You see, delegate, if you look it up, establishes 2 things. That there's a hierarchy in a relationship. The person who is delegating is always delegating an authority to a person of lesser power.
Yep.
Not only that, it's a temporary transfer of authority to an agent to do a job for the person who's doing the delegating. The states' delegated power to the federal government establishes a hierarchy. The states have the superior authority over the federal government, and they have temporarily delegated certain powers to the federal government to do a job on behalf of the states. Foreign affairs, war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. Alexander Hamilton wrote in Federalist 33, if the federal government should overpass the bounds of its authority and make tyrannical use of its powers, the people whose creature it is must appeal to the standard they have formed and take such measures to redress the injury done to the Constitution. The standards we have formed are a constitutional republic where the federal government is inferior to the states, and that the states, being the creators of the federal government, are its governing body.
Yep.
Not the other way around.